So you want to start with 1 pound frozen bacon. Because I'm not cooking it and serving it piece by piece, it's all just going to be bacon bits anyway. I don't really care about it being separated in the pan. It'll separate as it cooks, and all the bacon fat that comes off of it, you're going to want to retain that for later because we're going to cook the potatoes in that. So then the next step here, while the bacon's still frying, we have your potatoes. So you want to cut them long ways so they're sliced like this, and then you cut them basically so they look like French fries. You just want to have little cubes. I'm obviously not doing it proper because I don't have 2 hands, but when you have your little cubes, literally sizes that can fit on a spoon, you can put it in the water so they don't oxidize. And that'll get all the starch out of there too. Leave them soaking there for about half hour. All the starch will soak to the bottom. Your soup won't taste starchy when you're done. Alright, from this point here, with this particular soup, I'm going to put this bacon back in. I realize that it's pretty undercooked at this point, but I want to leave some of that grease on there for when we fire it back up into the pan. Also, usually when I'm cooking bacon, I will drain the grease, but in this case, I want all that goodness to stay in the bottom, because I'm going to essentially deep fry our potatoes, the chunks of potatoes going into our soup. So then we have our chunks of potatoes here that are sitting in the cold water. Again, all the starches are being drawn out of that. And then over here, I chose not to use the ends because essentially you have to make almost like mashed potatoes anyway. So at the end, all of this minus the chunks are going to be going into a blender. So we can boil these potato ends just the way they are, and we can chuck those into the main soup. Alright, so now we have our boiling potatoes and our frying potatoes here. We've taken the bacon out of the pan, we've left the grease here. The bacon is now gone. I've chopped it all, and I've left it coarse chopped. This isn't for a salad, this is for a soup, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But this is the biggest, most important next step. For bacon bits, once it's all in your pan here, it's already half cooked. We add cold water to it. This cold water will essentially evaporate out of there, but what that does is it takes all the fat and it lifts all the fat out of the meat. The cold water will get the fat to lift out. So we'll put that on back here and put that on medium-high. And we're just going to let that simmer down, stirring it with a wooden spoon. Alright, okay, so the home fry type things are looking good. Our bacon's done. In here we have shredded carrots, 2, but I'm going to add another 3 celery stalks, finely chopped. It doesn't really matter because it's going in the blender. And then 6, there's 3 of them here, but I got an extra half in the fridge I'm going to add too. So again, this is all going to be boiled and blended, so it doesn't really matter. So you have all your veggies in the pot here, and this is what we call a holy trinity. So for equal parts carrot and celery, there's double the amount of onions. So if you think of 100%, quarter of it will be carrots, quarter of it will be celery, half will be onions. So when you have about that ratio, you're good to go. So from here, I'm going to add butter, a little bit of pepper, and then we're just going to sweat these out until they start to saute. Alright, so now I've dumped the boiling potatoes in here and I'm giving it a mix, just so all that can get coated in the butter. And then I am going to unwrap these and add them into here. And again, this is just the chicken stock. Alright, so now everything is sweating, the onions are starting to fall apart. Wish you guys could smell this through the screen. It's smelling pretty good. So we're almost at the point now where we're going to start adding our bacon, or not our bacon, sorry, our boiling potatoes here. And then we will boil it in the stock. So there's one pack of the stock in there. It's all ice cubes. So when that starts to melt down, make sure it all stays in there. When that starts to melt down and that's all water, I will add the second one. We got the potatoes over here still just on low, and the bacon's kind of just chilling as is right now. I know this looks goddamn atrocious right now, but it's not what it looks like when you're making it, it's what it looks like when it's finished. So other than these small ends that just have to melt in there, that will all become water. And one of the other most important things in this whole scenario, wine. We got red and we got white. So the most important thing to remember when you're cooking with wine is the color of the food. If you're using red meats, you use red wine. If you're using white meats like pork, fish, chicken, white wines, because it will stain the color of your food. I don't know, it's just the general rule of thumb. So, this atrocity down here needs a little splash of white wine. And I'm not a wine connoisseur. You could be watching this and telling me my wine sucks, which is fine, but I just asked for the opinion of the lady at the store. Just put a nice little splash of that in there. So what that will do is if there's any gunk at the bottom of your pan, that will lift it off and it will add flavor in there. Usually what wine does, if it's a meat, it will tenderize it and break down the fibers of the meat so it's a lot more tender. But in this case we're just using it for the flavor and to deglaze the bottom of this pan. See? Started to fix itself. It's looking better. And even if you notice, there's no drippage on the side, so I pretty much guessed it right to eye. That's one thing you'll know about my cooking. I'll try to give you measurements as best as I can, but cooking is mostly with your senses, so I try to use my eyes and my nose and my mouth more than measurements, I guess you would say. Alright, now that we got this all figured out, that's all melted down, we still got the clearance we need for it to boil. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this up, which I've already done, to let this boil. And what you're trying to do now is you're trying to soften these potatoes. And what you're actually doing is you're infusing flavor into these potatoes. So this moisture and this water is actually going to start getting trapped inside these potatoes the softer they get. So they're actually still retained in there. So when we blend it, these potatoes actually will be a lot mushier than they look, and it will disperse the water out of the potato into the masher as well. So now we just boil this down to get all the flavor, and then it'll go into the blender. So when you got your potatoes at a rolling boil, the best way to see if they're done is just by putting a fork in them. They should feel like mashed potatoes, and at this point some of them are pretty hard and some of them are really soft. So we're almost there. I'd say another 3 to 5 minutes of boiling, and then we're gonna move her over to the blender. So we can see now the stock is starting to reduce and that flavor is all getting trapped in those potatoes. So next thing I'm gonna do before I start blending it is I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. But this step you have to be very careful, because depending on the type of broth you're using and the salt content of the bacon, you're adding a ton of salt into this, so you have to be cautious. You can always add more, you can't take it away. And the more that it reduces, the more salty it will taste, because there's less water per salt content. So when we put a little bit of salt in there, I'm literally just sprinkling the top, and that's enough. We can always add more later or to taste when we're eating it. That should be good. So we're almost at the boiling point. And then after we blend that in, we'll be putting it back in here to add the rest of the ingredients. Alright, so once you're at this point, we're just going to slowly scoop it as best we can into here. Look at me making a mess. It's really hot, so make sure that you keep yourself protected. And another tip for this is make sure you try to put equal parts liquid to equal parts chunks. Just that way the motor of the machine that you're blending on is not getting overworked. and it has a nice even blend as well. Depending on how it looks after it's all blended once, I might put it through a second time, but we'll see when it's all done here. So I'm going to continue to do this, and then I'll start shooting the next section of the video once it's all filled up and on the blender. Alright, we got our pretty gnarly concoction here on the blender. So we're going to turn on low and just slowly start going. There we go. That's all we need. So it's starting to look more like a soup now. I have half left, so I'm just going to put that soup in here to hold while I blend the other half. So after blending your soup, it will look like this. It will look more like a porridge or a pablum. But for potato bacon, that's the consistency you're looking for. So now, in goes all the bacon. Let's stir that in there. We'll stir that around. Get that all mixed in there. That bacon was clumping together pretty good because it had cooled down quite a bit, but once it gets warmed up in this soup, it should spread out evenly. You can see it in there starting to spread out evenly. And then the next step is to take your home fries. I'm just trying to avoid all this extra grease in here. You could strain it potentially if you wanted to, but like a jackass in apocalyptic times, I am out of paper towel. So I'm going to move all those in there, give it a stir, and we'll give you a final look at our product here. Alright, so I've added the rest of the fried potatoes, and I've added a little bit of green onion that I had left in the fridge, and the bacon's all in there now. So let's give it a final stir. Oh, this smells crazy good. So there we go. What you're going to want to do is you're just going to want to put that back onto the burner, just so it all comes together. But when you're done, you have little pieces of bacon, little pieces of onion, and little pieces of potato in your original potato blend. So stay tuned for the final product, guys. This is your final product, minus the messy sink, but served with some shredded sharp cheddar and just a couple little pieces of green onion for garnish. But that's what she looks like. Good to go.